Today we are going to talk about the initiatory path of the major arcana known as the tarot trumps. I like to use the ancient tarot rather than the so-called esoteric tarots. The trump cards have images that are very unusual. They're very mysterious. And tradition holds that even though it was developed as a game, it was also developed as a way to hide esoteric information and to keep it alive. Because remember, back in those days, a lot of esoteric information could get you killed. So it was a way to kind of do as the occultists do. They keep something hidden by putting it in plain sight. And so we can very easily look at the 22 trump cards as degrees of initiation. From the beginning, we have the card called the Fool. The Fool can be labeled either as 0 or as 22. The Fool works in both of those places. It's not one or the other. It really depends on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it as number 0, you can see it as an individual human being born, not knowing anything, all kinds of stuff to learn, ready to make all kinds of mistakes. As the number 22 can be seen as the person at the end of their incarnation, looking back over their lives to see what they've learned. And the mystery of the Fool is that it's through folly that mankind learns wisdom. In other words, you could say it's through making mistakes that we learn things. If you don't make mistakes, you're never going to learn anything. So a lot of people are so afraid of making mistakes, right? But if you didn't make a mistake, then you'd be stuck. You'd be just stuck and you'd never grow. When you're looking at it as a person going through an occult initiation, however, you could look at it as either grade 0 or grade 22. At grade 0, it's the neophyte, the person that starts the occult journey, occult initiation at 0 as a neophyte. No matter how much they think they know, they have to confess that they know nothing. So you could call that the empty rice bowl of the Zen practitioner. It's becoming as a little child from the Christian mysticism. And from occultism, it's the I know nothing. I know nothing. That's a high state of being. Now, as grade 22, it represents the adept. The adept has learned everything it can possibly learn in life. The ultimate lesson is, now that I know everything I can possibly learn, I still know nothing. So that's the 0 grade and the 22 grade. A lot of people, when they start on an initiatory path, they want to get power. They want to get knowledge. And they notice that the more they want it, the more those doors close to them. And that's because they don't know how to get the doors opened. You get the doors open by saying, I know nothing. I know nothing. The Fool represents the laws of magic in that they are impersonal. They're natural, but they're impersonal. And so how you approach magic is what you're going to get out of it. And the Fool doesn't understand that what they bring to a situation is what colors the situation, is what colors it. And so a lot of people approaching the path, approaching occult initiation, come with a bunch of preconceived notions that they project onto it, and then they interact with their path based on those preconceived ideas of what it is. And so this is a degree of initiation that needs to cleanse the mind of all preconceptions. The next degree is the magician or the juggler. Now, if you're looking at the ancient Marseille tarot, it's not this depiction of a magician at an altar. And that makes sense because the magician at the altar of a lot of esoteric decks looks as though that being is already an adept. Why would the adept be grade 1? So we don't look at it that way when you're looking at it from the ancient tarot perspective. This is the juggler, the carnival huckster, the one that's playing the shell game, and it can also be the entertainer. It's the beginning of learning magic. You're a beginner. It's the beginner's mind. You're trying stuff out, and it's the fake it till you make it phase. You're faking it till you make it. As long as you're honest with the fact that you don't know anything and that you're learning everything, fake it till you make it can be very, very powerful. But to use that magician energy to sort of think that you can pull the wool over the eyes of the universe is where a lot of people get into trouble, acting like they know more than they do, coming at occultism as if they already know something. And then if you already know something, you can't learn it. So the juggler is all about getting started. It's all about beginnings, beginning your journey, actually getting things together, actually learning the nuts and bolts, making all kinds of mistakes, usually going through periods of arrogance. It's also the reason why in occultism there are so many oaths of secrecy. Because during this phase, usually the would-be initiate has a problem thinking that they know more than they know, and then they blab all kinds of stuff that they shouldn't blab. So that's why a lot of occult orders will have very kind of scary vows of secrecy. One of the main lessons during the initiation of the magician or the juggler is that of silence. Keeping your mouth shut, learning as that you're a beginner, that you don't know anything, and that you're going to be quiet, because the more you close your mouth, the more you open your ears and your mind. This is the time where you need to do a lot of reflecting, a lot of revising, allowing your teacher to correct you again and again and again, and just assuming you're making mistakes. You're assuming that you're making all the mistakes. And if you do that, then this is a very powerful time of growth. This magician part of your initiation. It's a very powerful time of growth. It's a type of making pacts, if you will, with a higher power, making agreements or covenants with a higher power, that you will receive wisdom and that you will act on that wisdom, and that you learn how to not act all by yourself, not make decisions all by yourself, that you make decisions in consort with your teacher. Now, not everybody's got a teacher in the physical world that are walking a path of initiation, but everybody's got a teacher. Everybody's got an inner guide, and that inner guide is very real. So this card does signify the power of magic, real magic, true magic, and we all have that power within us. And it's a symbol of that, but it's also a symbol that power is something that must be practiced, that must be developed, and it must be honed and refined. The next degree is the High Priestess. It's ruled by the moon in many teachings. The moon is a magical planet from our perspective. Even though it's not technically a planet, it's a satellite. The ancients called it a planet. It's a luminary. The moon is that focal point of the sun onto the earth, that focuses the sunlight onto the earth in a way that causes magnetism, that causes the tides, and that causes the menstrual cycle, and causes the emotional ebbs and flows of life. This is where we start to learn the difference between illusion and reality. This is a phase of our initiation where we start to question everything we see and assume that what we see isn't the reality. That's the occult wisdom, is see the non-initiates, they see what's in front of them with their senses, and that's all they interact with. And they say, well, that's what it is. This is reality. But the occultist, the initiate, starts to learn that what they see with their senses is the illusion. And that is why when you're looking at the world from a magician's point of view, from an initiate's point of view, coming from this degree of wisdom, you recognize how malleable the physical world actually is. And it's very exciting when you start to really learn that. The five senses that we use to perceive the world around us are faulty at best. And once we recognize that, then we start to learn how to turn toward those inner senses that are not faulty at all, that always are capable of showing us the truth. And that's the world of the intuition and the world of that second sight. The higher purpose of magic is starting to be taught at this degree, leading us to discipline our imaginations, learning to discipline that inner sight so that not only can we see things from that sight, but we can conjure things with that sight, that we can imagine things with that sight, and that the world of our senses can start to respond to that which we imagine. The High Priestess is sitting between usually two pillars in the esoteric decks, and that's a kind of an interesting thing because it represents those two pillars of the tree of life, the male and the female, and the positive and the negative, the plus and the minus. And she sits there in the middle. She's the bridge. And so in that way, the High Priestess represents Shekinah, represents the veiled goddess, and represents the womb of all creation, that which is the mystery behind the veil. And that mystery is, remember, that what we see with our eyes is the illusion. What we feel, what we experience with our senses is the illusion, and the reality is something that we have to find behind the veil. The third degree is this Empress card. The Empress starts to synthesize what we have so far learned in our journey. And she represents emotion, she represents poise, and she is the energizing part of that feminine force of the Shekinah that brings the magic that we are learning into being. So if you think about the Shekinah as that light of the angels, that current on which all magic manifests, she is the place of divine love, perfect love, the love of a mother for all creation. The magician and then the High Priestess and the Empress together, they form a type of trinity that makes magic possible. They represent power within us that makes magic possible. The Empress being that true feeling, the emotive powers of our mind. Through her poise, she also is the representation of the need to learn how to conjure feelings at will. Right? Learning what we learned with the High Priestess is not everything we see with our senses is real, and that we have to learn how to conjure with our imagination. With the Empress, she's conjuring with feeling. She's conjuring with her emotions. So on real practical levels of magic, learning how to conjure the feeling of that which we desire. The High Priestess also is called the daughter of the mighty ones, or the watchers. It's said that they dwell in the spaces between the stars. And they are here to make sure that nobody interferes with the rhythms of the universe, especially those who are working magic. If you're at all familiar with my little booklet on the ritual of the hours, it talks about wheels within wheels, within wheels, within wheels. And that is one of the mysteries of the Watchers. And she is the daughter of the Watchers. She is the Shekinah. She lives within us as our emotions, as our feeling nature. And our feeling nature is something that is also beyond our physical senses. Our emotional nature is far beyond our physical senses and is closer to the truth. She represents Venus. And remember, Venus and the moon together are what create the Shekinah. If you think of the Empress as Venus manifest on earth, she is all beauty. She's the mystery of beauty. She's learning the mysteries of beauty. If you think about many of the Native American traditions that talk about walking the way of beauty or walking the beauty way, they are hearkening to this concept of the Empress. The Empress walks the way of beauty because the way of beauty is the way of infinite, the way of the infinite intelligence. Anything that's not beautiful in this world is something that's pulling us away, according to the Empress's teaching, pulling us away from our path. Her lesson is walking the way of beauty, because the way of beauty is the way that was set for us. So part of what she has to do is look at the things which are not beautiful in our lives so that we can learn how we are attached to them, so we can let go of them and walk the true path. And that true path is the way of beauty. The next degree of initiation is the degree of the Emperor. Now, this is a very masculine card, and it represents the ability to be tested, to be tested in a severe way. Now, there are many old initiatory ceremonies that gave you some extremely severe testing, but the universe also seems to give us some severe testing, and it's not done so that we can be tortured. It's done so that we can be awake to the purpose of our walking the path of an initiate. If you really want to be an initiate, you have to be awake to it. You have to be aware of it. And the Emperor card gives you some of that testing. The Emperor is a very much of an executive. It's the executive degree of initiation. And you know how an executive is. If it's nonsense, he crosses it off the list. He says, no, only this, only that, only this, only that. The Emperor doesn't have time for nonsense. The Emperor doesn't have time for folly. And so as you are on that degree of the Emperor, that fourth degree of the Emperor, you have to be ready and willing during those periods of your time when you're going through an Emperor initiation to be willing to let it go in favor of the truth. So it's definitely a martial, Mars-oriented card, and so it can seem a bit severe to a lot of people when they're going through an Emperor initiation, but it's not severity in order to torture you. The only thing that seems severe about it is when we are holding on to outmoded, outdated, childish understandings. And our initiatory path needs to be cleared from all of those things. And the Emperor is there to do just that very thing for you. The fifth degree of the High Priest or the Hierophant or the Pope card, and it's another masculine card, just like the previous two were feminine cards. The priest here in an initiatory path represents the initiator. If you think about the mysteries of Eleusis, the initiator of the mysteries of Eleusis, and the mysteries of Eleusis were always given so that you can know yourself, and find that, what they call that middle path, nothing in excess. This is where you start to really get a lot of the nuts and bolts of your magic, your talisman practice, your sacred scripts, and really learning the mysteries of it, being initiated into the actual mysteries of it, rituals that are magical. And when you're going through the initiation of the Hierophant or the High Priest, it's a very ritualistic period. The secrets of magical working are usually hidden, because anybody can be given some of these symbols, anybody can be given some of these ritual gestures, but if they don't understand them, they're not potent for them. And there's a reason for that, because you can inadvertently and carelessly use magic when you get to a certain point, and you can cause harm to yourself or others, even if you don't mean to. And so that's why this phase of your initiation, when it's ruled by the Hierophant or the High Priest or the Pope, is to really educate you in strict structures of ritual. And there's a place for that. And it's not for eternity, but there is a period of time when you need to really commit yourself to a system. And that's what this is all about. The sixth degree is the Lovers. And the Lovers represent what is known as the children of the voice. The angel on Kether, or the crown of the tree of life, that is Metatron, and appears from the clouds. The fact that they call the card the Lovers really causes confusion. That angel with the bow and arrow usually. And this is a symbol. It's a high angel, and it stands for controlled thought or will, and divine thought and will, and it flies straight to where it's supposed to go. And the other people in that card aren't watching where it's going. They're only watching what's around them. It's a clue to understanding how a human being who possesses the mentality to understand the instructions of a higher power or a higher teacher is ready for degree number 6. And it's that angel Metatron who makes the sacred mysteries really clear by elevating our minds so that we can understand and be inspired by that angelic wisdom. We can be taught on that higher level. Not only that, but that angel showing you exactitude with your magic. Not just like, well, whatever works. It's whatever your intention is. It doesn't fly with degree number 6. No, it's this way. It's only this way. And so it's when you're going through number 6 is when all of your distractions start to be addressed. All of that wandering mind starts to be addressed so that you can find that focus and you can be instructed very clearly. And so a lot of that nonsense that you hear about with magic of like all that matters is your intention and it doesn't matter what you do or what system you follow or any of that, you realize that, yeah, that may be true on some levels, but you get to a point at which it's got to be a specific way or it won't work. And that's what the lesson of number 6 is. Letting go of the wandering mind, letting go of those distractions, letting go of you trying to teach yourself, and really being taught by infinite intelligence on a very specific and very narrow path. Very, very narrow path. So as we go through these 22 degrees of initiation in the tarot trumps, the next trump is the Chariot, number 7. Now, in some of the decks, it's called the Chariot of the Sun. And so some people have the understanding that this is a solar card. But the Chariot of the Sun is actually the moon. The Chariot is the moon because it is the chariot of the sun, bringing the sunlight through a filter through that chariot onto the earth as moonlight. So its rulership as the moon is oftentimes a misunderstanding because this is a victory. This is a card of victory, but it's a card of spiritual victory, and the moon is victorious. If you think of some of the moon goddesses, such as Artemis, they are victorious. The moon and victory go hand in hand with the Chariot. If you think in terms of your own battle with your lower self, some of the parts of your mind that keep your true will at bay, you know that if left unattended, we waste a lot of time. We waste a lot of resources. And unless we come up against some of our own tendencies in this life, we waste our lives and we don't have anything to show for ourselves. And the Chariot is a recognition that you are victorious in that battle. And it's a very positive thing in that regard, battling, because you're battling those parts of yourself that want to allow yourself to remain at status quo and to not grow and to not evolve. Now, if left to your own devices, you would eventually evolve. You would eventually be where you need to be. But with initiation, remember, initiation is a speeding up of a natural process. So something that might take you many, many, many lifetimes, you can handle in one lifetime through the process of initiation. And that is one of the things that is represented by the Chariot, and that's speeding through a lot of your lessons. And the way we speed through a lot of our lessons is not by skipping over them. It is by not succumbing to those parts of ourselves which cause delay. And so that is one of the esoteric interpretations of this card, is that we are victorious over all of those aspects of our personality that would have us delay our progress. Justice is number 8, the next degree of initiation. Justice always prevails. It doesn't always seem to prevail because we have a limited perception of the totality of the universe here. We don't see things except for through linear time and 3 dimensions. So what we experience in this world is very, very limited, and we have a tiny, itty-bitty little cross-section of reality. And then we think that we have what it takes to judge, that we can judge whether something is good or bad, we can judge whether something is righteous or not righteous, and whether something is just or unjust. But we do not have the facility with our limited perceptions here to make such judgments. And that's what justice is here to teach us. Justice is here to teach us that all is well, that there is nothing but equilibrium in the universe, and that we do not have to A, worry about it, nor do we have to B, help it along. All we need to do is accept it. And the idea of acceptance is definitely something that justice brings us. And that can be one of the more difficult lessons that people have when they are initiating into higher and higher expressions of their spiritual growth, is this idea of accepting everything exactly the way it is, knowing that there is a higher intelligence, that everything is ultimately perfect, just the way it is. Now, justice also represents what we call the divine law of restitution. And the divine law of restitution only occurs within our limited experience here, because on the plane of the universal, restitution is not required, because there's nothing to be restored, because everything is perfect. But here, the divine law of restitution is necessary because it gives us an indication of that perfection in our limited experience here. And so when we call upon the divine law of restitution, what we're doing is we're asking to be shown the balance of this justice as it pertains to this very small and limited experience that we happen to be having right here and now. So justice is that assurance and that lesson that all is exactly as it should be in the world and that it needs no help from us. The next degree of initiation is called the Hermit. And the Hermit is that image of a monk with a lantern. The Hermit represents that inner guidance. And the inner guide is nothing other than our own selves in our right mind. So the Hermit represents us in our own right mind. And since for most people, the self in our right mind is so different from what we experience from our day-to-day reality here, that it seems as though it's a separate entity from us. But in reality, it is nothing other than our own right mind. Now, that own right mind is always carrying that lantern, because that lantern can show us the truth in any moment of time, any point of space, any situation. It is the light bearer. So in that regard, we are all one in that light. So that Hermit can and does always exist in each and every moment. But we oftentimes don't even know that that Hermit is there. That we don't even know that that guidance is there. We feel very alone in the world, and we're not alone. We feel alone because we try to carve out our own identity separate and distinct from everything else, and then we wonder why we feel so lonely. But in reality, we are not lonely. We are not by ourselves. We always have that connection to the source and to all that is. And that is what we find through the Hermit, through that time. Now, the Hermit represents also the fact that as initiates, our most important experiences are done on our own, in solitude, by ourselves, without any input from other people, that our growth happens by ourselves. We are born alone and we die alone. And that's because we are alone only from the perspective of how the world sees us. But in reality, when we're alone from the inputs of this world, we are at one with our source. We are at one with all that is. We lose our loneliness when we find solitude in this world, because we are no longer looking to illusions of the world to give us our sense of connection, and we're looking instead to the truth. And that truth can be found through that lantern that the Hermit holds. The next degree of initiation, number 10, is the Wheel of Fortune. Now, the Wheel of Fortune is a wheel that turns, just as the wheel of life turns here. And if you think in terms of seasons, if you're looking at the seasons of life, your youth could be your springtime, your young adulthood could be through your summertime, your middle age could be your autumn time, and your old age could be your winter time. And that is represented by the wheel of life. It is how we are just as cyclical as the seasons, but we are a microcosm of that. But remember that from the wheel's perspective, if you're experiencing the wheel from the point of view of the hub, there is none of that. There is no change. It's stable, and everything revolves around the hub. So the mystery of the Wheel of Fortune from an initiatory perspective is that you want to notice what the hub is rather than the manifestations of the hub. So when you find that hub, when you find that source, when you find your inner source, you recognize that you're not subject to death. You're not subject to aging, and you're not subject to change. Because if you're thinking in terms of the manifestations of the wheel, then your fortunes go up, your fortunes go down, your life, goes through change after change after change, and you're just feeling like you're being flailed about by the ups and downs of fortune. But when you realize that that's because you're identifying with manifestations, you're identifying with the world of effect, once you identify into the world of cause, you recognize that everything revolves around you. Because you and infinite intelligence are one. You're no longer subject to the flinging about by the wheel of fortune as you become initiated, because you are focusing your attention and your identity on where that hub is. The next degree of initiation, number 11, is called strength. Strength is depicted by a female figure who is taming some sort of wild beast, oftentimes a lion, but it's not always a lion. It's very similar to that Sumerian epic called Gilgamesh, where that hero is confronted by a wild man who he has to subdue before he can proceed. That's a type of an initiation. In the tarot, it's not a wild man, it's a wild beast. And those wild beasts are within us. And so this is that part of the initiatory process where you have to confront your fears, where you have to confront the things that scare you, and you have to turn and face them. And as you do that, and remember you're being guided and led by that hermit, as you turn and face those fears are nothing but illusion. Or they're impulses that you've misunderstood. A lot of times you have a very holy impulse, and by the time it gets filtered through your mind and through that projectory function of your mind, it becomes distorted. And so those impulses that are very spiritually oriented then become distorted, and they become something that you fear. And then the human response to those fears are to avoid them, to run away from them. And then those impulses then start to run after you, saying, wait, you need me. And then you get more afraid of them, thinking that they're coming to attack you, and you run farther and faster. And that big illusion is this part of the initiatory process must be ended. And that's only ended when you stop running, you turn and you face it, and you see what it is for real. And that's that process where by facing the things that you're afraid of rather than running away from them, that those things become transformed. Oftentimes you just simply recognize them for what they are, and they're beautiful things that you misunderstood. Sometimes they are phantasms that you've concocted, and once you realize that that's all they are also nothing to fear. And so that's why we say sometimes when we get the strength card within a reading is that the things that we have been running away from and afraid of are like beasts that need to be tamed. And once they are tamed, they become beasts of burden. In other words, they are there to serve us. The 12th degree on this initiatory system is called the Hanged Man. And the Hanged Man is a very sad kind of experience. If you look at the card, there's this man hanging from a single foot, and his other foot is kind of tucked behind the leg from which he's being hung. What this card represents is several things. One is self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice. But see, the thing is, when you are sacrificing yourself, you aren't experiencing pain. Because when you're sacrificing yourself for a higher purpose, for a higher good, you don't experience pain, you experience bliss. For instance, if within this experience, let's say you had a parent who was getting older and needed attention, and you decided to sacrifice your time to give to them, to care for them. That doesn't cause you pain, that causes you pleasure. Maybe at first you perceive it as being painful because there's, so much of your energy is no longer allowed to be used for yourself. You have to use it for another. But as you do that, you experience so much pleasure. You experience so much joy in being able to provide for somebody that which they can't provide for themselves. So when you do that, then this hanged man experience you recognize is representing upside down perception. Upside down perception. And that's why we say when you get that hanged man in a reading that you have to ask to be shown what things really look like so that you can view them upright. In which case you realize you're not hanging from a tree. You're actually standing up, but only on one foot, and that you need to put the other foot down. You need to put the other foot down. And so in this sense, the 12th degree of initiation not only represents serving others and sacrificing your own self for the sake of a greater good, but in doing that, by putting your foot down and saying no to the temptation to believe that what that is painful. You're going to stand on your own 2 feet, and that way your service is something that you're doing out of a sense of goodness rather than a sense of sacrifice. So anytime that we get this in a reading, it's a reminder that sacrifice is to be a joyous thing. And in an initiatory perspective, sacrifice is no longer sacrifice, it's simply service. The next degree is the degree 13, and we call that death. Now, in the old tarot, it wasn't labeled. It was just 13. There was never, they didn't call it death, but it was obvious that that's what it was, this grim reaper on the battlefield. Death is initiation, death and rebirth. But it's the mystery of death here is that death serves life, and that life cannot be killed. And that when we go from lifetime to lifetime, or even in one lifetime, when we go from one situation to another, we go from one relationship to another, we go from one job to another, we go from periods of our lives, where our youth dies in favor of our old age. Death is there to support us, not to harm us, because the only thing that death does is destroy form. And once we recognize in our initiatory process that form is illusory by nature, then we realize that death is destroying the forms that are giving the illusion that we are mortal. So death is destroying the forms that obscure the truth, and that is that we are eternal, that we are immortal, and that nothing can kill us, that this body is not who we are, that these circumstances are not who we are. Anything that can be killed is not who we are, and that what remains after death destroys form is who we are. And so death is a very kind teacher in that regard. The 14th degree of initiation is called Temperance. Now, in this card, there's an angel that's pouring liquid from one cup or vessel into another. And this represents the motion, the constant motion of spiritual substance in your life, that nothing can stagnate in spirit, that spirit is always new. It also represents when we are going through an initiatory process, that in this life, no two initiations can look alike. That what you have to go through is very specific for you. It's like your soul has its own thumbprint. And that thumbprint is going to dictate the initiatory path that you need to follow. And there's no cookie cutter initiation for anybody. And that your initiation is guided by this angelic force, not by you and not by any other human being. And this angelic force knows exactly what you need in order to be initiated into the higher mysteries. And that's what that angel is mixing up, concocting that. We call it the angelic elixir around here. But that's just a name that we gave for it. But it's a universal truth that each and every initiate has to go through his or her own path, and his or her own elixir is that which is sort of like the alchemical philosopher's stone, That Philosopher's Stone is not something that's universal, that everybody can use the same Philosopher's Stone. The angel is making that Philosopher's Stone that is your Philosopher's Stone, and it wouldn't work for anybody else. And that Philosopher's Stone is showing you eternal youth, eternal life, because your soul never ages and your soul never dies. Next, we have the devil, number 15 in our initiatory path. So the goat-like figure on the tarot card is not the devil, but Baphomet. And the real Baphomet figure is really Capricorn, which is the sign of the goat. Many old myths are that Capricorn was the very first sign. The very first sign. We all started out as Capricorns way back in the day. And Capricorn is the natural place of origin of all human life. Worshipping Baphomet, which the Knights of Templar were accused of, is one of the many ways that this figure of the goat was misunderstood and misinterpreted. Sin and the devil and all of that have been sort of like projected onto this goat image, whereas in Baphomet, the goat was seen as the sign of Capricorn wherein all things started. That is the mystery of Pan, and Pan means all. Now, the goat-footed god Pan in the Greek myths, some of that was not exactly the same as Pan meaning the universal, the all. And so the devil here means all. The mystery of the devil in an initiatory sense is that the devil is not who we think it is. The devil is not who we think it is. The ego would project its own image of itself onto the devil so that we are afraid of it. But in reality, in this particular sense, the devil is just a costume that spirit is wearing in order for us to understand that we have been hypnotized for many generations into fearing something that doesn't exist. Fearing something that doesn't even exist. So the devil here is a different kind of facing our fears than we had in the strength card, because these are not fears that we've concocted on our own. These are fears of the species consciousness that have been in place to keep us down. And so when we confront the devil in an initiatory sense, we are confronting the species understanding of what evil is. And when we confront that and we realize that there is no evil ultimately, there is nothing to be afraid of, that there is nothing to fear at all, and that we have always been safe, we always will be safe, nothing is out to get us in spirit. Our souls are completely perfect, just the way they have always been, how they were created, completely safe, and there's nothing for us to fear. That creates a sense of relief, but also a sense of uneasiness for many people, because then what happens is you can't look at the world the same way again after you go through that initiation. Nothing will ever appear the same again, because you recognize that the devil that you've been afraid of in whatever form has always been nothing, has never really existed. And that a lot of your life and many of your lives has been spent fearing something that's not there. And so this can be disconcerting at first, but ultimately very freeing. And it's a very important degree of initiation, because once you are freed from the fears that the devil represents, that fearlessness gives you a sense of power and invulnerability that flows through your entire initiatory process to continue the next steps. You'll never be the same again once you go through this initiation. You'll never be afraid of anything ever again. Next, we have the Tower. Degree number 16 in your initiation is the Tower. Originally, it was called the House of God. The house of God is being struck by lightning, and these people are jumping out of the windows. A lot of times you can look at the Tower as being a depiction of the fall of Lucifer, the fall from the angels' pride, but it's really considered the descent into matter of the angelic help. So the fallen angels, from a different point of view, all of the structures that we've built that are there to hurt us, the angels come to save us from by destroying those structures. The consequence of that is at first a feeling of helplessness, and then a feeling of great gratitude. Because once these structures are gone and we are freed from them, then not only do we not have that fear of the devil, but we also no longer have the distractions of all of those structures that the devil has convinced us to make to keep us stuck, to keep us away from our own true power, our own true home, which is in our souls. So as the angels strike down those human-made structures, at first it's very scary. At first it's very sad. At first we mourn the loss of those forms. We mourn the loss of our old selves. But we realize that those were only just childish toys that were distracting us and wasting our time from really experiencing the true joy of who we are. When we go through that tower initiation, it's a very wonderful thing. It's ecstatic. It can be a little disconcerting to see a lot of our cherished concepts being dashed before our eyes. But on the other side of it, we are so grateful that that happened, because we are no longer wasting our time searching after things which have absolutely no meaning. 17 is the next degree, and that's the star. And we have this goddess figure pouring water from two pitchers, one into a stream and then another one onto the ground. And above her head shines a cluster of stars. And this is the grace of the star goddess, and it represents the lost wisdom being poured into the stream where it mingles with other streams. And this lost wisdom comes to us because we have allowed that tower to fall. So we are no longer obscuring this wisdom, and this wisdom no longer needs to be hidden from us because we're not going to misuse it based on those false concepts that we used to have in the tower. The symbolism here is divine grace, and the star goddesses are all one, whether it be Inanna, the star goddess, whether it be Ishtar, whether it be Asherah, whether it be the Virgin Mary. It doesn't matter. All of those star goddesses come together because there's only one. And that one goddess is the mother spirit of the Creator. And that mother spirit of the Creator is here to heal, is here to give grace. And grace is your state of being that is natural. You were born in a state of grace. And that's what this goddess is doing with those pictures, is reestablishing your experience of grace as it was meant to be and as you were created. And again, now we no longer have all those structures distracting you from grace. So now you can live by grace rather than by karma. And that's what this initiation enables you to have, is grace instead of karma. 18th degree is the moon. The mystery of the moon in this regard is the mystery of illusion. It's actually confronting all the illusions that we have been accepting as real our whole life. Now, once we have the grace of the star goddess and we're living from grace to grace rather than from karma to karma, it's easier for us to look at the illusions and not get pulled into them, so that we can decide that we no longer want to be tempted or hooked or pulled into illusions. So this is that lead us out of temptation from the Lord's Prayer here, because now you're traveling far beyond the realms of normal human consciousness into the depths of the inner worlds. You can't anymore rely on your past experiences. You can't rely on the things that the world has taught you. Now you have to go for pure wisdom. The moon card is a card of illusion, especially in divination. But walking through that illusion, now you are protected because you're living by grace. So that is walking through the valley of the shadow of death in that Psalm number 23. You're no longer worried about it. It doesn't affect you. You're not afraid of it because you are protected because of who you are, not because of anything that you've done. And you've already experienced the disillusionment of the Tower card, and you've already experienced the reintroduction of yourself as a being of grace from the Star card. And so now when you can confront those illusions, you are not tempted. The Sun card is the next degree of initiation, and it represents success and balance, and it represents the sun itself. So this does represent the physical sun, but it represents more the spiritual sun, because the physical sun is simply a symbol of a greater principle. This is all the sun gods put together, but it's also all those sacrificed gods, because all the sun gods usually are sacrificed gods. And so you've got all of the Christ-oriented mythos here as well. And so the sun represents having done for us what we can't do for ourselves. It represents the miraculous. It represents salvation. And salvation of the soul simply is not that your soul needs to be salvaged because it's in danger. Salvation of the soul simply means a redeeming of, or a remembering of who you really are, rather than who you thought you were based on your personality and based on your ego. And that's not something that we can do for ourselves because we don't remember ourselves. And that's been held in trust for us. And that's why the sun card can redeem us, can give us the rebirth of initiation that is necessary. Number 20 is the judgment. Now, God's judgment is very important here because God judges. And so the last judgment is depicted on this card. And all these graves are being opened, and this angel comes with a big trumpet, wakes everybody up, and lifts them up into heaven. And that's what that judgment is. Now, as an initiatory step, the last judgment talks about the fact that after you go through this initiation, you do not depend on your human judgment anymore. You've had the last one. You've had the last judgment. After you've gone through this initiation, you do not depend on your own judgment, which is a good thing because your judgment is faulty. And you realize judgment isn't your function. There is an angelic force whose function is judgment. And so when we go through this initiation and we are lifted up onto those higher levels of consciousness, then we live our lives free of judgment, and the judgment of the infinite is constantly at our disposal. And the infinite's judgment is that all is well. Everything is perfect, and nothing but perfection exists. And therefore, we no longer have to live worrying about going from problem to problem to problem. We go from grace to grace to grace, from success to success, and from glory to glory. And that's what this initiation provides for us. And it doesn't really matter what's going on in the physical, because the physical is simply temporal, and we are no longer living in the temporal. We are living in the eternal. And finally, our final degree of initiation is the world. And the world is usually depicted as an androgynous person dancing with a wand in each of their hand, encircled by a wreath. And in the four corners of the card, there is a different depiction of a cherub, or those four animals. So there's a lion, which is the fixed sign of Leo. There's an angelic figure, which is the fixed sign of Aquarius. There is a bull, which is the fixed sign of Taurus. And there is an eagle, which is the fixed sign of Scorpio. So it's all the fixed signs, and those represent angelic guardians. And so once we are in this final initiation, we exist in the eternal magic circle that is our birthright. That is, we are divinely protected. There is only our true will, and there's nothing to distract us. So when we are in this final initiation, we are initiated into the mystery of perfection, and we are perfected beings, and we no longer look to the world for our identity, and we no longer look to the world for our satisfaction, because we always are satisfied. We are in a state of perpetual bliss and understanding, and knowledge is ours. And we no longer have to worry about anything other than being protected, being safe, and being at one with our source. If you looked at the Fool as being number 22, it represents the end of the journey as an enlightened individual that no longer needs to incarnate on this world, that is free from the cycle of births and deaths. Now, the Fool then comes back, oftentimes, into incarnation in order to be helpful, in order to be a helper, right? Even though they don't have to incarnate anymore, they choose to because they want to help other people to become initiates like they have been. So that is the 22 degrees of the tarot trumps as initiation. Much, much love and many, many blessings.